Hey everyone! Prefers reduced data is a new media feature that people can use to indicate that they want to use less data when visiting your site. Very quickly, media features or media queries are what make responsive design possible by letting developers adapt their sites to their users' device capabilities, like screen size. Recently, browsers have started adding prefers media features like dark mode that let developers respond to a user's preferences rather than just their device capabilities. While prefers reduced data is not supported in browsers yet, support will land soon. It's available for testing right now behind a flag in Chromium browsers and available by default in the Polypane browser for developers. So why this media query? The average size of a web page is about 2 megabytes, and it's been slowly rising for the past couple of years. That means that if you have a 1 gigabyte monthly data cap, you can visit 500 web pages, or just 16 pages per day. Just for fun, check how much tabs you currently have open. With just those, are you over your daily budget of 16? Of course, the types of pages you visit will greatly influence this number. Wikipedia will last you a lot longer than scrolling through Facebook or Twitter, or indeed watching a Twitch stream. Also, equally important, the speed of a connection can influence your experience. I'm located in the Netherlands, which sits at number 12 on the worldwide speed index with an average of 100 Mbps, meaning I can comfortably stream live video. But if you're in, for example, India, your average internet speed is much lower at just 15 Mbps. You can bet that you would rather want smaller, faster sites. India, by the way, has the second highest number of internet users in the world, only behind China. Reducing your web page's size helps with both load time for people with slower internet connections and them having access to your pages in the first place. Lastly, there's also the people that just prefer sites to be as fast as they can. It's worth noting that there is an HTTP header called Save Data On that is already in widespread use that can tell you at an HTTP level when people prefer using less data. It's a little out of scope for this talk, and it's not as easy to use as the media query, but it's good to know that it's there. So how do we get started with prefers reduced data? Well, first off, the media query has two values: no preference and reduce. Ideally, you would implement the reduced data version of your site as the default version, and only when the user has no preference, give them the full fat experience. Unfortunately, because there is no browser support at the moment, this means everyone gets the reduced data experience, and that's probably not something you can get buy-in for right now. So practically, we have to switch it around and implement our data preserving features in a prefers reduced data reduce media query. The nice thing is that while this won't do anything now, it will automatically start improving your site once support for the media query lands in browsers. There are three file types that cause the majority of web page weight: images, fonts, and videos. I'll discuss strategies for each of these. Starting with fonts. The nice thing about fonts in CSS is that they're only downloaded when they actually get used on the page, as opposed to when you define them in CSS using @fontface. So if you fall back on the system font, using, for example, this font stack, then you prevent a potentially large font file from downloading. Using the system font is usually a fine alternative and has the bonus of always looking readable to your visitor because it's the same font they see everywhere on their screen. You can always choose to send a smaller subsetted font when the chosen font is important for the branding of your site. Make sure to use it just for the branding and ship only the characters you use to keep everything small. Background images tend to be large, so if you can replace them with either a solid color or a gradient, then that should be your first choice. You can think of the background images as a way to enhance your page when the user is fine with using a bit more data. If, however, the background image is essential, you want to consider doing three things. You want to use a modern format like WebP or potentially AVF for the images. The new versions of browsers that implement prefers reduced data will have support for these modern image formats. For the reduced data image, you can use a smaller image and zoom that in. It won't look perfect, but it could be good enough. On the other hand, you can also use a large image, but with a much lower quality setting. The quality can be set much lower for larger images, and formats like WebP and AVF have specific algorithms that make sure certain high detail areas of the image remain clear. To serve smaller content images, the images on the page, we can turn to the picture element and provide a source with the prefers reduced data media query, like so. While there is no support, this media query attribute will evaluate to false, and then start matching one support lens and switch out the image for your lower quality one. Here again, you have the choice of serving either a smaller image or the same size, but with less quality. You will have to experiment to find what works, and for example, use squoosh.app to figure out the sweet spot for your image. While it's generally a nice experience when a video has buffered by the time you press play, that involves downloading at least part of the video in advance. When a user prefers to use less data, it means they will also be okay with having to wait just a little while for a video to start when they press play. To implement this, we need to set the autoplay and preload attributes on a video element when there is either no support for prefers reduced data, or there is support for prefers reduced data, but there's no preference. For that, we need this bit of hacky CSS inside JavaScript. The window.matchMedia API lets you test if a given media query applies to the current browser window. The media query we test for is essentially if prefers reduced data does not match, or if prefers reduced data does match. Then evaluate to true. Because of that or, which is the comma, it will always be understood and evaluate to true if we support prefers reduced data. However, if the browser does not understand or know about the prefers reduced data media feature, it will ignore the entire media query, and that results in it evaluating to false. That way, we have a way to test if prefers reduced data is supported by the browser at all. Then, we also check for the no preference directly, and we use the same window.matchMedia API for that. This no preference variable will be false either when reduce is true, so a user wants to use less data, or when there is no support. So what we need to do is combine it with the supported value to figure out if we can autoplay, like so. Either there is no support and we autoplay, or there is support and there's no preference to use less data. Lastly, by only setting the attribute in JavaScript, we make sure that we default to not autoplaying and not preloading when the JavaScript doesn't load. As an additional note, before you autoplay video, make sure that the user doesn't also have prefers reduced motion media query, have the prefers reduced motion media query set to reduce. You can use the same window.matchMedia API for this. For an example, that also includes using the save data header that I mentioned earlier directly in JavaScript. Check the blog post that I wrote on this topic at bit.ly/prefers reduced data. So that's a few ways you can use prefers reduced data right now that will automatically make your site perform better for users once support lands. I hope you start experimenting with this now, since that's a signal for browsers that this is something people want. You can use Polypaint to quickly test both your regular and reduced data versions side by side. If you want, you can start a free trial at polypaint.app. I'm on Twitter as at Kilian Valkhof and at Polypane. So feel free to reach out with comments or questions.
Awesome. Thank you so much. That was a really great talk. I learned a lot about accessibility for those who prefer uh, less data, and also I didn't know that there was even like a reduced motion. Did you say a header or a query?
That's a media query as well. Yeah.
Oh, awesome! That's so cool. I didn't even know about that. That's so cool. I was wondering actually, for start off, are these snippets that you provided available online somewhere? Do you have a GitHub or a gist or something?
So most of them are in that blog post I linked.
Oh, cool.
And I can also copy that in the Twitch chat
Oh, cool. Yeah,
after this.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. That sounds great.
The only thing that's not in there that I figure out for this article specifically is the figuring out if there is support at all. So
Oh, yeah.
I'll make sure that gets added to the article in the next few days.
Yeah, that'd be great. Yeah, actually, I was wondering, when do you think this media query will become supported? Is there a timeline on that, or?
I haven't been able to find a timeline. The media query is fully spec'd out. Chrome already has an implementation behind the flag. From my understanding, what we're waiting on right now is whether or not there are potential privacy implications.
Okay,
So
yeah.
they're looking at that now.
Okay, okay.
So I don't see any particular privacy implications compared to other media queries
yeah,
that we already have. But it's good that they check this before adding it for wide availability.
yeah. Everyone likes a little bit of due diligence. Yeah, no, this is really awesome. Thank you so much for doing this talk. Yeah. Sorry. I just learned a lot. I'm still processing quite a lot about it. I think I'm gonna have to start going through and auditing my own websites to make sure I'm up to speed for when it drops, or when people need this. Who do you think actually will benefit the most from this? Is there a particular type of person, or?
So I mentioned two pretty big I don't know situations. So
Yeah.
either you have like a monthly data cap or you have very slow internet.
Okay.
And very, of course, is a little dependent on your own experience. But if you look at the majority of the internet users right now, that's not people like you and me.
Yes.
That's not people in the Western world using, MacBooks on 100 megabytes internet connection. That's people on often feature phones or very cheap Android phones with very poor networks. And the interesting thing is that if you think about this, if you implement it well, it doesn't just mean that your site gets loaded faster,
Yeah.
which is nice, but it also means that people can actually access your site for the first time, because before it would have timed out and it would have taken 5 minutes to download, and now they can get to the content in the first place, which I think is like the biggest benefit.
Yeah, very much so. We just had a question in the chat. So if users decide that for a particular site they're willing to override that setting and load more data, is there a way to set that maybe dynamically with the JavaScript?
Like you could choose to implement it however you want. More or less the same as with dark mode. So dark mode right now has a media query you can use, but a lot of sites choose to let people override that.
Okay, yeah.
With like a dark light mode toggle. And it remains to be seen how this feature will be implemented in browsers. Right now, the save data header that I mentioned is already available in Google Chrome for Android, where it's just a check mark in the settings. So in the settings, there's a check mark that's like turn on data preserving features.
Okay.
And I assume that this will hook into the same check mark.
Okay, cool. Well, thank you so much for your time today in the presentation. I learned so much. We're going to be taking a small break now, but up after that will be Sakshi Reina with a talk about microservice architecture. It's not just a buzzword, and we should talk about